Hello and welcome to Miguel Delaney's Inside Football. This is a new podcast, vlog, I'm not sure what exactly you call it, but essentially an audio-visual companion to a lot of the work I do in the Independent and my newsletter. And I think mostly the idea behind the podcast or the videocast will be to explore the true significance behind a lot of the headlines in football, but also, as I'm doing tonight, or today, sorry, it'll be kind of sometimes a bit of a video column of the weekend's action. In this case, I'm actually just back from Arsenal Manchester City, so it'll be the main focus of today. And I've had a chance to reflect on it a little bit and a lot of the discussion around it. And I do find it interesting with Arsenal right now. I mean, I cover them a lot, as you can probably tell, and I hear a fair bit that goes on within the club. But I find because of perceptions of Arteta within the game as well, because the club is at the moment on a 21-year wait for a league title, it feels like every single discussion with Arsenal is pushed to the extremes. I think that can create a bit of an emotional agitation outside the club and within. And I suppose this game against City was almost a classic example. I mean, it feels like it's been framed as if, Arteta is getting criticised for caution. I do think there were grounds to criticise Arteta in this game, but I wouldn't really do it for caution, especially not in a match where, and this, it must be acknowledged, is historically unprecedented. Guardiola has never set up a team in the way he did against Arsenal. The closest example I think people can think of is in the 2014 Pokal final against Borussia Dortmund, which is of course against a very specific style that Jurgen Klopp has. But there were elements of this match where I felt like I was watching some sort of modern equivalent of Internazionale's 2010 semi-final Champions League victory over Pep Guardiola's Barcelona. And this was considered this grand clash of styles, intercongesting all space around the box, often 11 players in the box. And I think anyone watching that game at the time, myself included, could never have imagined that Guardiola would set up a team like that. It seemed contrary to his whole ideology. I mean, we're not just talking about someone who subscribes to a particular way of playing. We're talking about a high priest, someone who's changed the football world. But I suppose, there is a certain logic in that if everyone plays that way now, including Arteta, or at least some sort of interpretation of it, it stands to reason that actually a thinker like Guardiola would go the opposite way or try and do something that no one else is doing, including a very congested defence, two big men at either side of the team, Donnarumma in nets and then Erling Haaland up front. What a goal it was from Haaland. And yeah, as I say, thinking, I actually think for me, this is what really framed this match. I think Arteta overthought his approach against one of the game's great overthinkers in Guardiola, who himself went unusually, I'd say, reductive and simplistic. And I suppose what I mean by that is, it's probably not a controversial thing to say at the moment that Arsenal feel the superior team to Manchester City. I think even from speaking to people around City, in the build-up to this game, there was talk about how this is maybe the first time in years, really, where they were underdogs going into a game against Arsenal. Because even last season, before the 5-1, say, when there was when City were in the middle of a crisis, there was still maybe that sense. I think at the time they were considered like they were coming out of that crisis. There was also the sense that because of the previous meetings between the teams, there was going to be a different dynamic. But for this match, and almost because Arsenal won the game 5-1, Arsenal going in as I suppose the team that would have expected to win. Everyone's putting this title race in the context of Liverpool against Arsenal. Now, from speaking to a few people around Arsenal, some of Arteta's thinking around this game was basically that. We all saw the headlines from Tuesday after they beat Athletic Bilbao, where Arteta spoke about finishers. Essentially, the players, he doesn't, well, it's a fancy word for subs, or a rugby word for subs. But there is obviously a logic to it because, it's a different game now, it's a much more intense game, and, these aren't necessarily players that are just not considered good enough to start anymore. It's about using them in a different way. So obviously, I think he's been conditioned by this. I think so much of Arsenal's season is shaped by Arteta's response to last season, which is basically they got into the core of the campaign. That period, you're playing 3 games every day. A game every 3 days, and he was missing some of his biggest and most important players through injury or fitness issues. So I think everything is framed by that. Also, why there's been such a focus on squad depth, and as an extension of that, finishers. So for this game, and this is where I think he overthought it. A lot of thinking there, where, from what I'm told, Arsenal and Arteta's staff were conscious of this idea that because Manchester City themselves are changing approach, because it's a new team internalising Guardiola's ways, and also that they are going from maybe more of a possession game to more of a bit of a potentially high press game. A lot's been made of Pep Lijnders, Jurgen Klopp's former assistant, now working with City. That it's been noted by other clubs how City can potentially they get more fatigued than we're used to after an hour, and obviously issues like Rodri not being at full fitness plays into that. So against that, I think Arsenal would have expected maybe that this is going to be a tight game. Then after an hour, he could bring on his game changers, match winners, whatever you call it, Eze, Martinelli, Saka, to then win a game against a tired City. But I suppose in thinking that way and overthinking, I think, again, a lot of thinking there, I think Arteta, he tried to be a bit too clever with his formation. I know there's been a lot of focus on how, this was defensive-minded midfield. Again, I don't necessarily agree with that. And this is what I'm talking about with everything being pushed to the extremes with Arsenal. Like, I don't think any of Zubamendi, Declan Rice, or Mikel Merino are defensive midfielders. I think they all have defensive qualities, but they're generally, I suppose, as central midfield as you can get. In fact, Merino I would actually consider more of an attacking player, given his forward play. So Zubamendi's in the team because he controls play. Rice is the most powerful runner in the team. And Merino's being picked at the moment because Arteta wants to use the kind of positive emotional momentum around Merino's recent goal scoring, particularly for Spain. I think that's why he did it. Now, the one thing is, I suppose they're a little low on the real sort of craft or magic that can open a team. And against that, and I think this is where it's really interesting, for all that Arteta thought about this formation and this setup for this game, I don't think he expected Guardiola to go as extremely defensive as he did. And I think this is actually quite an interesting game from the from the perspective of football history, because we're talking about one of the most influential figures in football history in terms of ideology, in terms of how the game is played, Guardiola. And he goes completely against his principles with this approach, which is basically, extreme congestion of space, counter-attacking, ceding possession. What sums this match up almost is that Guardiola, 38%, I think it was, maybe slightly over that. It's the lowest percentage a Guardiola team has ever had in terms of possession in any game. So I think Arsenal are a bit shocked on that. And I think that's what prompted the earlier subs maybe than what was expected, and why he brought on Saka and Eze at half-time. Now, obviously, another massive reason there was that Manchester City went ahead. I think it's been talked about how, Guardiola was defending a lead. That's why he went so defensive. I don't buy that. I actually think he went into this game with this specific approach. You could see it from the start. And in fact, Haaland's supreme goal came from Arsenal came from City hitting Arsenal on the counter-attack in classic style. Just that space opening up. And what a goal, I have to say. Haaland seems in prime form. I think he is actually adding more dimensions to his game. And it was just one of those moments as well where the minute he and Reinders set off, you could see this was going to be a goal. It seemed obvious. But yeah, so once City had the lead, they had something to protect, and they also had, I think, this approach set. Arteta had to change up. And there was an immediate transformation once Eze and Saka came on. They immediately started to create. I think they did more in the first 7 minutes in the second half than in the entirety of the first half. But I think it's because of that, and especially City. I don't think it wasn't that they were quite hanging on, because I think they did such a good job in terms of congesting space. And I have to say, I thought Guardiola and O'Reilly was superb. But they did such a good job in terms of congesting space that Arsenal struggled to create. But Had some of Arsenal's biggest match winners been on earlier, I think they could have exhausted City more and stretched them even more. So they didn't have to rely on this. And it's why I think that there's such another one of many ironies to this match was that it was one of the first times that City went with a high line, which is in those final moments, that Arsenal finally caught them. And you could see City's fatigue in the fact that Eze, he was given so much space to pick out that pass for Martinelli, and a super finish by Martinelli, by the way. But Eze, it was like suddenly that moment, amid all the intensity of modern football, Eze looked like kind of Socrates in the 1982 World Cup, just having the time to saunter forward and pick out a pass. But because of all that, I think, while I would say the tenor of some of the debate has been a bit over the top, that can still be consistent with the fact I think Arteta probably got his starting lineup wrong. I think he overthought it. I think he was cautious in lineup, not necessarily an emphasis. I think they are two different things. Maybe showed City a bit too much respect, and it's why I think that Arsenal feel they left something out there. It mightn't be that significant in the long run, but while Arsenal, I can't get away from this thought, again, I've had it all day, which is basically, it does feel like Arteta is quite Guardiola-like in how much, and I know this from speaking to people who know him, the week before a game, he goes through every single potential permutation on his head, tries to come up with multiple configurations, and it's why his dream at Arsenal, basically, or his great ambition, is have a team that is completely unpredictable, that the opposition manager can't pick or can't try and prepare for. And I thought it was significant, actually, that at half-time, Guardiola waited for his team to come out and then to see what subs that Arsenal had made. That's what Arteta's ambition is. But as Arteta overthinks and kind of considers every possible angle, Liverpool just go and win. They go and do. Now, obviously, that's also simplistic. I mean, Liverpool winning in the way they do comes from Slot being, as one chief executive said to me, possibly the brightest manager in the world like now. I think he's a superb coach. I think that's quite a widespread sentiment. And Liverpool, I mean, again, this sounds so simplistic, but it is there because obviously there are vulnerabilities in the team as Slot himself is causing Liverpool to evolve. I think they are they're looking to take more risks than last season, I would say, and that comes from having a very front-loaded approach, which means it looks like in every game they can be got at, but they have the individual quality to just make it happen. And I think this is going to end up as one of the most interesting dynamics this season, I have to say. I feel like it could come down to Liverpool's individual quality and a willingness to go for mostly a higher level of player in terms of their purchases, particularly Isak's a big one. Wirtz, even though I think we haven't seen the best of him yet. Ekitike is obviously a bit expensive. And I feel against that, rather than going for true game changers outside Eze and Zubimendi in different ways, Arsenal have gone much more for depth. And I think that question almost will become like, I mean, there was such an obvious difference. I don't mean to pick on Gyökeres because I think he's a good striker. I think he's still adapting. I think some of the criticism has been unfair, and he's new in the team. I think that's another reason actually that explains Arteta's approach for this game. But there was such an obvious contrast. I mean, 9 minutes into the first half, Haaland gets the ball surging through. Now, it's very unfair to compare anyone to Erling Haaland, but you still can't help notice the contrast. Second half, similar sort of stage of the half, Gyökeres suddenly gets a chance to race forward, and I suppose the power or the pace just isn't there in the same way. And I do wonder whether, if Arsenal are looking to get over the line in that way, whether they will eventually regret not maybe, say, putting the money from Madueke, as good as he's been, and Gyökeres into signing an Isak level player, or going for Isak himself. I mean, there was a time not that long ago where he was really interested in going to Arsenal. But on the other side of that, of course, Arteta is basically planning this season for when we get down to November to January, and there is that very intense period, and teams just won't be able to play the same 11 or even 14 every game. I think that's what he's looking at, and that this kind of dynamic could decide the whole season. Then I suppose you come to maybe the same issue as last season, but we might get to there, and Liverpool have already scorched away. They just, I mean, sometimes when I think journalists and pundits even talk about this sort of thing, it sounds almost like a bit of a cop-out. You're pointing to their spirit or their knack of just getting a win. But I do think I think in a lot of modern football discussion, we overlook the effect of psychology. I think it swung back a bit too much the other way. And Liverpool now clearly have this sort of the confidence and assurance that comes from winning. I mean, this is why people used to say winning begets winning. It's why there is still this surrounding issue around Arteta's Arsenal, as brilliant as they've been. And I do genuinely think Arteta has done a superb job there. I mean, they're now a serious team, no matter what anyone thinks about them getting over the line. And that comes from being a Manchester United level basket case 4 years ago, really. I mean, it was at the start of the 2021-22 season that City actually destroyed them. So there has been a massive swing there. Speaking of basket cases, or maybe they might hope now previous basket cases, because Manchester United, I think, put in was it maybe the most convincing display of Amorim's time so far? Because I felt this was a level beyond some of the big Europa League games, which became successful almost out of chaos in response to chaos. Where in this match, against a better side than anyone they faced in the Europa League in Chelsea, their own issues notwithstanding that I'll come to, United, they had a focus from the off, there was a conviction from the off, and really I felt for the first time this season, I know their XG has mostly been quite high in a lot of games, but I thought it's about the XG, I suppose, and the eye test. And in this game, they were immediately bombarding Chelsea. It was that old-fashioned sense of siege at Manchester United, putting Chelsea under real difficulty, like creating, tension and nerves in the Chelsea side in a way we haven't seen enough of. I think one of the great problems with Amorim's United has been how when games are actually in the balance, it feels like it takes them so long to construct an attack, whereas also it's so easy to open them up. Whereas in this, I think there was a sharpness, there was a conviction. I mean, a lot of it was crosses from out wide, I thought, but still, that was causing Chelsea so many problems. I mean, the issues in midfield remain. I think that's where we saw such a kind of a reliance on width. That's going to have to come with transfers. But of course, one of the great discussions, I suppose, around Amorim has been, were the recent results the level he's going to have to accept, or the level everyone else is going to have to accept until he gets those transfers, which isn't necessarily a very progressive or encouraging thing if basically you're saying, well, we can't do anything until we spend 400 to 500 million. Instead, this was a sign of something better without necessarily having all the players he wants. I suppose Manchester United being Manchester United right now, it wasn't easy. They made it difficult for themselves, but they came through it, and that is important. And speaking about psychology and emotional momentum, wins like this do help. They actually start to they begin to erode doubt, even if it's subconscious in the players. That's how you build a team in this way. It's not just from the process of coaching and learning an ideology. It's also the psychological assurance that comes from victory. And this is what Amorim has really needed. And obviously he needs a few wins in a row now. The Brentford game on Saturday is going to be very interesting. I think actually Keith Andrews at Brentford, he's done maybe a better job than people expected. And I think they will still be a handful for a lot of teams, the Fulham game notwithstanding. The Chelsea game showed that last week. And Chelsea, just there are a few murmurs now about a few difficulties around Maresca. And I think some of Maresca's decisions, especially the immediate subs after the red card, by the way, I thought Sanchez should have gone for the foul alone, let alone the the denial of a goal-scoring opportunity. But to immediately remove, to immediately make those two subs, to take off Palmer, and even I suppose, there's the question if Palmer's suffering a fitness issue, whether he should have started. And it feels like that Maresca is beginning to get into one of these cycles where he's second-guessing himself a bit, or always chasing his own decisions. And this is manifesting in, I think, poor performance from Chelsea and suddenly a downturn in results. Again, the Club World Cup, or the effect of the Club World Cup shouldn't be overlooked in all this, because that is going to have an effect this season. But yeah, Chelsea, I think we've got the beginning of some issues there. And I suppose then it's telling maybe that Chelsea's single convincing win this season came against West Ham United. Now, obviously Potter hasn't worked out at West Ham, but whatever you want to say about Potter and how he can be maybe rightly criticised a question, it's very instructive that West Ham's options after a progressive manager like Potter And fair enough, yeah, there's a whole debate over whether Potter can only fit into the sort of structure that Brighton have. But West Ham are going from that to Slaven Bilic, their former manager, who's one style, and it obviously fits into one certain profile. Nuno Espirito Santo, who looks the favourite for the job and is a totally different style. And then Gary O'Neill. And that speaks to, I think, one of the reasons why West Ham themselves are in this perpetual cycle, why they always feel like they want to take a step forward, and the kind of the Pellegrini Moyes dynamic indicated this. But then they keep having to go back because really the way they're set up requires a manager who can dig in. And like a lot of this actually, it's got parallels even with the issues at Manchester United and why some clubs, just I suppose, don't break these cycles, why they continue to struggle. Because if you speak to kind of the best sporting directors, the best directors of football, the best chief executives, they would say the standard model in football, and I suppose this maybe was something what Dan Ashworth was supposed to do at Manchester United and wasn't necessarily followed, or doesn't look like it was necessarily followed, and maybe what West Ham need is. But I mean, the kind of the flow we've got to take is, first of all, decide what sort of club you are, where you are with current resources, what you can do with expenditure. From that, pick a football ideology. Now, preferably, it will be a football ideology that is linked to the history of the club and the cultural traits of the club, because it brings easier buy-in. It creates kind of something deeper, something the fans can tap into, something that I suppose also evokes the history of the club. I think it can amplify the football you play. But the key is you decide on an ideology, and then every single decision from manager to recruitment should fit in to that ideology. Manchester United haven't done that. In fact, it almost felt like the Amorim appointment was the wrong way around in that sense. They basically, rather than decide on ideology, they got in a coach like this and have anchored themselves to a very specific interpretation of a tactical ideology. And West Ham obviously haven't done it, as they continue to kind of bounce around potential football styles. So at the moment, on going into Monday morning, it's looking like it's going to be Nuno in at West Ham. But let's see what happens there. And yeah, I suppose that's a little video column from the weekend. I'll be back this week. I think these will be much more regular, particularly when we've got big headlines or some news story. And in modern football, we've got big news stories. It feels like 24/7. We often comment about it in media, how the life cycle of any story is much shorter because something bigger always comes along. There's this constant noise about the game. So yeah, we'll add to this noise through this podcast, videocast, whatever you want to call it. Well, it's called Miguel Delaney's Inside Football. And please like and subscribe, all the rest of it. And thank you. I'll see you next time.